I'm going to move over here, and we're going to bring out someone that you may know. She plays Lieutenant Erica Ortegas on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Please welcome Melissa Navia. And next, I'd like to bring out Summer Ash, Astrophysicist and Science Communicator. Summer, come on out. And next up, we have my good friend, Dr. Lucila Rosines, radiologist from Texas. Welcome, Lucy. Next, we have Adeena Mignogna of Northrop Grumman. And finally, we have executive producer, Robert Feierbach. Robert, come on out. Welcome, everybody. It's been wonderful being here and being in DC, especially at the National Academy of Science. I wanted to kick us all off and have everyone introduce themselves, but I also wanted to have a fun question for the panelists. If you could let us know which sci-fi character that you've identified with in your career trajectory. So I'm going to let Melissa kick it off and introduce herself, say a little bit about her, and we'll go on down the line.
So I'm Melissa, and I have the honor and the privilege to get to be on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I play Lieutenant Erica Ortegas, like Amy said, and I'm the helmsman of the Enterprise. And it has just been a dream come true to be part of this franchise, part of this world, and part of our world and why we're all here. And I'm going to totally answer that question with just what my current job is. I would say Ortegas is my dream role, so there you go.
Well, hey, I can't get any better than that, right? How about you, Summer? Tell everybody a little bit about what you do. And you're cool where you work, which is a pretty cool place.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Summer. I am a engineer and astrophysicist by training. My current day job is at the Very Large Array, which is a giant radio telescope in New Mexico. And I do K through 12 STEM education, actually STEAM, because we're going to talk about creativity, education there. And I also run the visitor center and the visitor experience. So you should all come visit at some point. And I think I have like two answers, because one is just that I so identify with one particular episode of Next Generation, Dr. Crusher, when she says, if there's nothing wrong with me, there must be something wrong with the universe. Awesome problem solving. And then not just because I'm on this panel, but I kind of have to say Ortega too, because I totally loved flying and wanted to fly when I was younger. And we were talking backstage about the black hole maneuver, which is now my new love is black holes. So the combo is kind of awesome.
My name's Lucila. I'm a radiologist. I specialized in pediatric radiology, which is any kind of imaging that is done in kids. I would have to say that the two sci-fi characters I identified with, it's very easy for me. One is Dana Scully, hands down, and the other one is Lieutenant B'Elanna Torres from Star Trek Voyager, which I'll probably get into a little bit more on the discussion.
Wonderful. How about you, Adeena?
I'm great. Hi, everybody. I'm Adeena. I'm a mission architect at Northrop Grumman by day and a sci-fi author and podcaster of the Big Sci-Fi Podcast in the evenings. And I came into this really by passion for Star Wars with robots, then Star Trek, for space exploration, and that's kind of what got me in. So I was very happy on day one when former astronaut Bob Cabana said one of the important things, to have a career in this is a passion for it, because that is certainly what brought me in and got me through my education and into my career. As for your question, yeah, I have multiple answers too. I have the person who I would say I most identify with kind of as a full life is Dr. Crusher, because she's professional woman and also a mom, and the blend of it, and she really is passionate about all these things. I definitely identify with her, but also with Scotty, especially when he showed up in the episode Relics and Next Generation, and he's on the forge for wait a second, you didn't tell him how long it really takes, as in you didn't build any schedule reserve into your estimates, and that's definitely how I approach engineering.
Thank you. How about you, Robert?
Yeah, I'm Robert Feierbach. I've been in 30 years in the space industry and worked with some of the big satellite operators and SpaceX as well. Space Systems L'Oreal. I've done a little bit of everything in space. I'm currently president of Maritime Launch. We're building a spaceport in Nova Scotia. And we're actually going to have a launch in July, a small launch just to go through the con-ops of the whole thing already, and built a pad there and everything else. And I'm also president of an aerospace company here based in DC, Zero G Launch. So I was conscripted to come here in this movie, and I'll talk a little bit about the film later. But the person that I identify with, because I'm a hands-on kind of guy, I can fix cars, I can fix engines, I like to put my hands on everything, is Matt Damon in The Martian, because he had to basically figure out a way of getting out of his predicament, right? By getting his hands dirty and trying this and trying that, and that's me. So I identify with him because of it.
Well, as for me, I would be remiss if I did not say Captain Janeway from Star Trek Voyager. For the last 5 years, I've worked with Kate Mulgrew as her media director. I've met a lot of fabulous women and men, but so many women come up to me and come up to Kate and tell them, I'm an astrophysicist because of Captain Janeway. But for me personally, especially for this year, I've only recently been with Explore Mars since October, and I turned 39 this past November, and Kate was 39 when she started playing Captain Janeway. And she was just getting started, and I feel that I am as well. So I have to say her. And also Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica. It's been a big favorite of mine for a long time, and also President Laura Roslin. I mean, there's so many fabulous characters in science fiction. Lucy had mentioned Scully, and I've written about Scully's impact and all that, but I really want to start us off by, of course, almost all of you said Star Trek person, and I wanted to talk a little bit, since we have Melissa here, about IDIC, which is infinite diversity and infinite combinations. The Roddenberry future of Star Trek is often an optimistic future that is not necessarily represented that frequently in science fiction. We get a lot of dystopia, post-apocalypse, post-alien attack, zombie virus breakout. So I wanted to see a little bit about how those ideals of IDIC and the hopeful vision of the future, how has that shaped your careers, and how have you identified with that, and how have you brought that into your work? So we can, Lucy, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we're going to talk about definitely have to bring up, like I mentioned, Lieutenant Torres. I started watching Voyager, I think when it premiered, I was about 13 years old. And I had always been interested in science. I was a product of PBS, public television, grew up watching, all these science experiments. I was very much into that. So the Star Trek show opened my eyes to kind of space and, is my mic not working? Hello, is that better? Okay, thank you. I can start over. I'll do a little brief spiel. So I was just saying that I was a product of public television. So I grew up watching Bill Nye. I would come home after school and see all of these science specials that were on PBS. And when Star Trek Voyager came out, I was about 13 years old. And I remember that the first time I had heard, Lieutenant B'Elanna Torres' name, it kind of sparked something in me, because I'm the child of Dominican immigrants. And so it didn't matter where she was from. They didn't have to specify that. It was just that, her name sounded very much like my name. My name, my maiden name is Martinez. And so it was just this little spark. She looked like me. She was promoted eventually to the, highest position in her department. She was the chief engineer on the ship. And so that diversity really struck something in me, really sparked something in me, and was like, you know what, I want to be like that. I really want to make sure that I get into as high of a position in science that I can in my field. And so that's how the diversity part played for me.
Thanks, Lucy. How about you, Summer? Why don't you go next?
Sure. So I think I mentioned that I started in engineering, but then I decided that I wanted to go farther than low Earth orbit, and I got obsessed with galaxies. And I went through academia then. And so as they were mentioning on the panel at 2 on STEAM and STEM, there's such a shortage of just non-white males in general in physics and astronomy. The life sciences are a little bit better balanced, but obviously it's still not perfect. But the physical sciences, it's really, really low. And there's just starting to be a lot more conversations about that in my field, which I really, really appreciate. but there's still not enough efforts happening. So I also had the opportunity when I was doing outreach at Columbia, working on a program that was a bridge program for underrepresented minorities in the sciences to go from bachelor's to PhDs. And it really made me so much more aware of the barriers to access. Because a lot of times they would come from undergrads that didn't have any research going on at them, or might not have the best like guidance counselor sort of career advice telling them how to get research experience and what you need to be competitive to get to the next level in the field. And so it was so rewarding. I almost felt like I learned so much just being on that program, trying to help them be competitive for PhD programs. And so now that I've moved on to radio astronomy, but specifically in a science education position, I'm really trying to make sure that as many times as possible, our programs are reaching the people that don't normally get reached, or especially just because now I'm in New Mexico and it's so rural and the distances are so big and the schools are actually at the bottom and broadband and wireless are an issue. And so it's really trying to make sure that our programming or the things that we want to offer the schools are things that they need and that we can bring to them with as little problem as possible.
Yeah, I've noticed that in the conversations that we've had, talking about, instead of the lack of what we're seeing, focusing on what we are seeing, celebrating what is happening currently. Women like, we had seen this morning in our Not So Hidden Figures panel. And I think, Melissa has definitely been seeing that, and I've even been just witnessing it in the last couple days, and when you've been chatting with the attendees here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the principles of IDIC and kind of you being cast and having that. There are very few Latina women in Star Trek and in sci-fi in general. So I'd love to hear your experiences so far and where you think that's headed.
Definitely. So what you're saying about the about IDIC, about a future that is much more utopian than we see when we're watching a show where the world is falling apart. Star Trek is the opposite. We're watching a world where things are working as we would like to think they will be working in a few hundred years, where people are working together, where our differences are what unite us, and because we've been able to overcome adversity, that is what has helped us, really explore the galaxy in ways that we could only have dreamed about at one point. And I've said this, often since I've been cast, but one of the things that struck me when we started Strange New Worlds was the producer saying that, the bridge on the Enterprise on our ship should reflect the world. And in my short time already in this franchise, what I have heard from anyone I've met, so in the world, in my life, and in conventions, and in conferences like this, is how Star Trek has affected people. There is not one person I have met who does not have a Star Trek connection, right? And that's a really beautiful thing, and it speaks to the power of entertainment, the power of culture, the power of what we see as children and how that defines what we become in life. And particularly at a conference like this, what I find so wonderful is the passion, right? So the passion for space travel. And then when you think about sci-fi, right, there's a real passion there. And so more events and more opportunities where we can really harness that excitement, and we can show people that really the way to get to Mars, the way to do more in space exploration is to continue to focus on all the things that are happening and not the things that are not happening. And so as a Latina myself, my family is Colombian, and that is a background and a history that I'm very proud of. And when I was cast, Amy's getting excited. When I was cast as Ortegas, for me it was just, it was the culmination of a lot of years of hard work, but hearing from people that I've met and that I've spoken with around the world, and especially in Latin America, what it means to have a Latina at the helm of this iconic ship, then it really starts to sink into you the importance of it and the responsibility that you have. But also what I always try to kind of lead with is positivity, right? So the things that are happening, rather than, while it is very important, of course, to be aware of what we lack and what we need more of. I focus on, for example, the Latinas that are doing so much in space exploration. And so any opportunity that I have with the platform that I have, because I'm recognizable now and people want to talk to me, I don't always know why, but you do. So the more that I can do to be like all the things that are happening, and conferences like this, if we can get them out into the world and show people that, you know, talking about Mars isn't just us kind of living in the clouds, because, and as everyone in the audience knows this and who I've spoken to in the last couple of days, that what we are doing and the problems that we are solving in space exploration are helping us with problems here on Earth, right? So everything gives back, like, you know, like all the great things in life. You do one thing and it gives back to that other thing in your sphere. And so yeah, so Star Trek is definitely the embodiment of a future that is that we hope to achieve, but I don't think it's idealistic. I don't think it's naive. I think it's possible, and we need to focus on what is possible, and also bridging those divides. So when people think about space exploration, they often think that, you know, you need to be an astronaut or an engineer or you know, some sort of aerospace something or other. But what I have known and what I've seen in person, speaking to so many of you just in the last few hours, is how every industry is really needed, every type of profession is needed to get us to space, is to get us to Mars one day. Like, we're not just trying to get to Mars, we're trying to live on another planet. And how do we do that? How do we solve those problems? And in order to solve those problems, we cannot be insular. We can't live in our little bubbles. We need to expand. And that really is the core of what Star Trek is. So if you ever meet anyone who's like, you know, Star Trek is just, you know, it's just, it's a fiction. It's really not that much of a fiction, if you think about it.
Well, we've all got our phones in our pockets now, so.
Yes. But so many people that I've met as, you know, as an actor who people relate to and people talk to, but you hear about people that the profession they're in today, and it can be anything, right? So I've met people today who are doing space policy, who are doing national security, who are doing planetary geology. I've met analog astronauts. I never thought I'd meet an analog astronaut. I've met couple today. But all of that is, so much of it comes from having had a love of science fiction. And that brought them to what they are. So that's something that we need to nurture and continue to do it in the young and the old. Who's old? Nobody's old. We're all young at heart. And so the little bit that I can do and that people in my field can do to continue to bridge what you guys do and what we do on TV, because really it's all part of that same world, and I don't think it's naive to think that Star Trek is possible one day.
Well, you've definitely set up the second part of that for me, which is I wanted to throw it to Adeena and Robert, because we had talked about, you know, not just STEM but STEAM. You know, the A is being the arts, and you know, Adeena had talked about. She said in one of our email threads that for her, creativity dovetails with science and engineering, and I really loved hearing that. And I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about that, and then I want to have Robert talk about HELIOS and have you show your 2 slides. So go ahead, Adeena.
Well, it's very similar to what you're saying, is that, you know, space exploration takes everything. And this is one of the messages I've been trying, I talk to a lot of high school students, and this is one of the messages that I try to promote, is that whatever you're interested in, you can apply that to space. If you're interested in an engineering field or a mathematical field, great, you can apply that to space. But if you're interested in arts, in music, I mean, we need that to help us communicate, you know, space exploration. So everything is needed. But then also, and where that comment really came from was, because I'm a science fiction writer, people come up to me like, oh, well, you got the creativity gene too. And I try to explain that engineering and science is also creative endeavors. It's just different skill sets, you know, with different kinds of creativity. But I also want to say there's a word that Summer used a minute ago about barriers, and that's been, you know, a discussion that we've had for a long time at work. So as someone who's been working in aerospace for 30 years, I've often been the only female technical person in the room. I spent most of my early part of my career that way, and it was fine. But we've been concerned about this for a long time, and we would have these conversations like, why can't we bring more, you know, women and more minorities in? Like, we've actually used that word. What are the barriers? And as I talk to high school students, what I've noticed a lot is when we talk about space exploration and aerospace, a lot of people think that we're these like rocket scientists and we're all straight A students studying aerospace engineering. And that's when I tell them, I was a terrible student. I was a lousy student. And it was the passion that got me through. It was working, I got my first job doing aerospace as a sophomore in college when none of us had any experience. The only reason I got the job compared to my peers was I came in with the attitude was like, oh my God, we're building spaceflight hardware. And that's why I got the job. And that's kind of what set up, this pattern of success for me, which was great because I was not a great student. So these are the barriers I try to break down. You don't have to be a perfect student. You don't have to be in love with math or great at math, but you do have to want to, do these things. And again, whether it takes you into engineering or it takes you into some other part of STEM or STEAM, have your passion and then come to space. And we'll
I'm an English major, so it's being
look,
up here.
See where you are, right?
Being up here and just having a love of space and a love of science fiction from a young age. And what you said about being the only woman in the room, and frequently I've been hosting panels at conventions for about 10 years now. And 10 years ago, there were almost no female hosts. And I had a fabulous woman come up to me, a doctor at University of Pennsylvania, said, why are you the first woman in 4 days to walk out on the stage to host a panel? Because that was for the 50th anniversary of Star Trek in 2016. And I said, if it were up to me, we would have a really diverse slate of hosts. And you don't even really think about hosting at conventions as having something, being the only woman in that space. But I suddenly looked around and I said to a friend of mine the other day, I said, unless I were to be in like the teaching field or the nursing field, I probably would be one of the few women in the room, no matter what in business. I worked in tech writing and in finance, so it's definitely. I went to CES for the first time in January. It's 116,000 people with 6% women, and that was crazy to me that the numbers had skewed so differently.
I want to say though, it has changed. I am no longer the only woman.
Yes.
In fact, now if I am the only woman in the room, only technical, it is rare. We have a lot of, not just young, I would say a lot of it is younger, but not exclusively. Like 2 or 3 years ago though, for the first time, my manager was a woman, which that was, new to me. I mean, I'd never worked for a woman before, but that's all, so it is changing. So I have seen the change. I'm very excited about it. It's been very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I wanted Robert to tell us about HELIOS and the very cool boss lady that's going to be at the center of this movie.
Sure, absolutely.
He's got about 2 slides for us to tell us a little bit about it.
I'll start a little bit just to kind of follow the thread here too. I was born in California, but I was raised in Bolivia in South America. So I was raised going to the mountains, going to the Andes, and seeing these incredible stars. And that's what really got me, once I got glasses, I had a bad vision, and all of a sudden I discovered stars at 9 or 10 years old. They were crisp and beautiful and incredible there. I really got enthralled by everything space, right? But the thread that I wanted to follow here is because I lived in a South American environment back then, my dad being American, my mom being Bolivian, I saw back in that context, I saw the importance of the matron of the house, my mother, very strong person, sort of the glue of the family. In the first decade of my space career, I was in Europe and I traveled a lot in Africa, 22 countries, right? And I saw a parallel there as well. The women were the glue of the family. Men kind of went and sometimes never came back, but the women were the glues of the family. So for me, the respect that I hold for the role that women have in civilization in general, from history, going back centuries even, is so important to me. And so in going into HELIOS, one of the things that really caught my attention was that the star figure is a female. And I thought, okay, that's a check mark. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what else.
I'd love to hear about it. I'm excited for this. Just hearing about what you guys have been working on and speaking with Patty, who's your casting director.
Right.
It's just been, it looks like an incredible film. I'm excited to add it to our sci-fi pantheon.
A lot of fun. So I was sent a script by Patty Beninati, who's the writer, co-writer, and then producer of this film. basically the film speaks about, just generally speaking, the sun is acting up in 2030. The story takes place in 2030. And because it's acting up, X type of flares coming constantly, and the infrastructure on Earth is starting to get affected, as is the ISS in its final year or two in space. And so the heroine scientist, former NASA astronaut, has to go up to space to save the world, activate a network that will somewhat abate the radiation that's coming in from these terrible CMEs. So when I was sent the script, I saw how carefully they integrated things that are actually possible in space and not, I'm a sci-fi freak, of course, as well. But what I really liked about this particular script was that it really centered around reality, what is actually possible. And there were a few things that I thought, well, this is not really, this couldn't happen, that couldn't happen. And Garrett Reisman had already done his comments on the script. So I added to those comments and I brought them all together and changed and made all those changes to the script a few months ago so that we could then also have avails for branding companies to come in, real space companies that today are around us and are doing things around us. And we can imagine what they will be doing in 2030. And so they have a role to play in the film. And the thing that really I like about it is the fact that, again, the star figure that saves the Earth is a female, strong, smart person. And the story is based on what actually is feasible to happen in 2030, from my point of view as a space person, right? So again, something that is very, very important to me is that if I'm to be involved with this project, I want it to be as truthful as possible. In my view, not to say that I'm not for sci-fi, because I love sci-fi too, but in this particular case, that's my sort of my objective. So Helios, we announced a director, Michelle Danner. She's incredible. I've been talking to her a lot recently. She did The Runner, a film that was, I think, 2-3 years ago or so. She recently released Miranda's Victim, and that's the movie based on which the Miranda rights came out. There was the young lady that got attacked and so forth. It's getting all kinds of accolades right now. It's been distributed just along the circles, the critics. It has Abigail Breslin, Andy Garcia, Donald Sutherland. Just a great, great movie. And the thing that I love about her is her eye for color and contrast and darkness. And as I'm seeing her, when I watched Miranda's Victim on a private link, I could just see the first 2 minutes of the film. I can imagine space and the stars and the darkness of space as she was seeing this car driving up and down the hills, in the beginning of the movie. So I can just see that she has the eye for this, and she'll be able to translate a beautiful story in the film, right? So my role, as I said before, is to bring some of the space branding partners. We have announced Blue Origin with the orbital reef. So that wasn't originally in the script. We only had the ISS in the script, but now we have a role for the orbital reef in the script as well.
Wonderful.
Obviously, right?
I think we have some people here who might be familiar.
It's a great partnership, obviously. And then we brought out another branding partner, a sponsor, which is ULA with the Vulcan rocket. So our heroine will actually fly up in the Vulcan rocket up to space to save the world. So we have relationships with NASA, with Space Florida, with the Space Force and the U.S. Air Force. And we had them review the script as well, so they can get their 2 bits in there. So again, we're just trying to make sure that we make this film as factual, as technically feasible as possible, and as truthful as possible on what can happen, in 2030, right?
Yeah.
With some liberties, of course, right?
Wonderful.
Right?
Okay.
We're comparing it to things like films like Gravity and Apollo 13 or Armageddon without all the booms and things like that some of these films have, but that sort of popcorn type of movie, right? That will entertain you, but from my point of view, with a lot of the truthfulnesses of things that are in the space environment, right? So, just wanted to give you a little bit of a picture of that. Again, I'm really excited to see the main character in this movie be a female, strong, intelligent person who goes to save the world. And I think it'll be very exciting for me to participate. I'm not a movie person at all. I'm a space geek, and
well, you're going to cast Melissa, obviously,
but
right?
I'll be there. I'll be at the end of the year. We start shooting in New Mexico.
Yeah.
So I'll be down there for a lot of these.
Can I come to set?
Yes.
Summer will be your consultant.
That's-
we have the whole.
We have a crew, a casting
the whole
crew.
casting crew. We're going to staff trio.
to come and see.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to be doing, and then obviously next year, at some point, a year later, you'll probably get some release.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about
Yeah,
that.
my
No,
pleasure.
it looks like it's going to be great. And you brought up a couple of the movies and films that we're all fans of, I think. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're watching and why. But before we do that, I wanted to switch gears slightly and talk a little bit about something that is not necessarily so prominent in science fiction, but very prominent in a lot of people's lives, especially people on the stage and in this room, and that's being a parent, right? Lucy and Adeena are moms, and they said that they don't really see that represented. And if you do see it represented in science fiction, it's usually very tangential. And out of the first 5 Star Trek series, we only had Dr. Crusher as the lead character, the main ensemble character, who is a mom, and we really don't have a ton of that representation in the most recent 5 of Star Trek either. So
Yeah, so I mean, sort of like Robert was saying, like I grew up in a very matriarchal house, very strong women, and I always knew I wanted to be a mom. My mom would laugh. I always used to say I wanted 10 kids because I was an only child. But anyways, I knew I wanted to have kids. I knew I wanted to go into medicine, and sometimes that's not always compatible. And like you were saying, you don't always see those figures represented in a positive way necessarily. And so I think you'll talk about Beverly because you have more experience with her, because I grew up watching Voyager, and so the only mom that we really saw was just B'Elanna being pregnant and then giving birth on the last episode. And then I remember that there was a line when she finds out that she's pregnant where Janeway goes up to her and is like, well, do you need anything? Are you gonna take a break? And B'Elanna is like, for what? She's like, I'm gonna work.
Yep.
I'm gonna have the baby,
Right.
and then I'll come back to work.
Yeah.
And so that kind of always struck with me. Just still the idea that maybe it's not always possible. And then I'll just talk briefly about the newer Treks, because we do see a few moms on that. I mean, we see L'Rell. She has her little baby with Vok. If you haven't seen Disco, you need to. And then, in the new season 3 of Picard, we see Beverly again, which, you'll talk a bit about that. But the overall...
And Raffi.
And Raffi, you're right, Raffi.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you all agree with me that the underlying tone in those experiences is not very positive.
And I had actually talked about this, is that also depictions of childbirth and
Yes.
the extreme trauma,
Yeah.
and the way that writers have used aliens and women as incubators. We talked about
Yes.
this a lot with Scully. We
Yeah,
talked,
yeah.
with the Alien series with Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
The way
And I
that
mean,
the Prometheus, where she has to have she has to cut it out of her, by herself on the operating table. It's very horror oriented, gore, and it's
And
an opportunity
even
for that.
L'Rell, she
Even
was an
L'Rell.
incubator.
Yes.
She didn't have her,
Yeah.
But also it's just an underlying theme of maybe sacrifice, right? You sacrifice your child, you sacrifice your role
yourself.
as a mother, yourself, and so you don't get to experience that as a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to
See forward.
see that going
Yeah.
forward, and maybe try to put in a positive experience and have it be an overall, have that representation be there in a complete circle for people who need it.
Yeah. How about you, Adeena? You wanted to weigh in a little
Oh
bit on
gosh,
that?
yeah. So to put it in a little context, I was 13, 14 when Next Generation came out, and I watched that show religiously, when it aired. At the time, I identified more with Wesley because he was like a year or two older than me as a kid, and I didn't think too much about Dr. Crusher or role as a mom. I didn't think about moms. I always wanted to have kids, and I always wanted a career. And I never, though, expressed it, to the point where people who were when I eventually, got to be in my 30s and started vocalizing that I wanted kids, people who were very close to me were like, you do? You're a career person, of course, and there's, so I feel like I went through, in real life, a period of time where people are still thinking, you have to choose. You cannot be a mom and have your career.
And it's a choice, you know. And so when I became a mom, and I was an unpartnered mom at first, which is what I was so in some ways with the most recent season of Picard. Sorry, spoiler alert, but it's been out for a few weeks.
Sorry, guys.
With Dr. Crusher, so she was a single mom initially with Wesley, not by choice. She lost her husband, but then she was a single mom by choice. She got pregnant and she chose to go it alone, and that's I was floored when they you know, admitted that and everything. And whether you agreed with the reasons or whatever, it is a choice that she made. And it was just a very powerful one, because she is a very powerful presence. And, you know, and so now as a mom and as a working mom and as someone who was, you know, I love my kids to death, but I also, like, they need to see me as me, which is more than just their mom. They need to see what I do, what I'm capable of, so they can grow up and know that this is kind of something you can do. And I get very passionate about this, because very early in my career, I had people who I knew, you know, coworkers and stuff, who were like, oh, well, if you ever have kids, you're gonna wanna stay home with them all the time.
I had that too.
And I'm like, first of all, don't tell me how I feel. You know, don't tell other people how they're going to feel about things. But secondly, it's like, I love my kids to death, and I think one of them is watching right now, and he knows I love him to death. But, you know, Monday mornings when they all go to school and daycare is really nice. And that's okay, you know, and that's the thing.
That's okay to say.
Have all these feelings.
It's
and
okay for
like
us
that.
to share that and feel
right,
that.
It's okay, because society puts a lot of pressure on it. You have to be one or the other, and you have to be perfect at all of it. No, you don't.
Yeah.
No, you don't. And so seeing, you know, Dr. Crusher, especially in the recent, where she has all these emotions and all this stuff that she's gone through, is really like, my jaw was on the floor watching that, like, for that aspect of it.
Yeah, and I mean, also, you just reminded me also of the storyline that Major Kira had on Deep Space Nine, where, you know, they worked the actress's pregnancy into the show. But I mean, Kira is also a character who has an extreme amount of feminist agency, even more than Captain Janeway in some areas. And, you know, seeing her and seeing that depicted, and then, you know, hearing Nana Visitor talk about her experience as a mom and what she went through when she was on the show, that, you know, that also...
But that was a very interesting, there was like a dichotomy there, because one, I was so happy to see what they did with her real life pregnancy, and they worked it into the show. That was wonderful. But on the other hand, you know, so Keiko O'Brien, I was, again, here you have someone who gave up her career.
Yeah, and they showed that.
And that kind of, like, I really had a hard time. I had a very hard time. I loved her character, but I had a hard time with that decision that they made in the show.
Well, I think we can jump off of that jumping point, because I wanted us to go into talking about what we're watching now and why. And the show that I have been preaching about to the fandom and to all my friends for the last year has been For All Mankind. And I've just been loving that show, loving the women on that show, and, you know, thinking about just being up here and thinking about Margot Madison and Molly Cobb and Danielle Poole, and, you know, they are not moms. You know, they, especially Margot. Margot lives in her office. You know, we're seeing this career woman, we're seeing how far she goes in NASA, but we're also seeing that even though the alternate history of For All Mankind has the Equal Rights Amendment passing earlier because of the greater involvement in the space program, that was something that I just was extremely excited to see. And I was like, we still haven't passed the Equal Rights Amendment in 2023. And to be able to see that she still could not have it all, right? She didn't think she could have it all, you know, like living in your office, you know, not having romantic relationships, devoting yourself entirely to your work because this is what I want out of my life. And I think, you know, as they're going forward in history, you know, season 1 being in like the 70s, and then 80s with season 2, and then on to Mars in season 3 in the 90s, seeing the people that they've left at home, talking to each other. So if you're not watching For All Mankind, I know this room, I'm preaching to the choir, but that's definitely something that I'm watching, and the women are diverse and have very different points of view. And I'd love to hear from the rest of you about what you're watching. You know, there's so much on right now. The Expanse recently wrapped, the Orville, Foundation, Resident Alien, which is on the more comedic side, of course, the Star Wars franchise with The Mandalorian, and bringing in, of course, Katie Sackhoff as Bo-Katan for, you know, the Starbuck connection for me is fabulous. So let's hear, Summer, what would you like to kick us off on what you're watching and why, and what the audience should be checking out?
Well, I'm watching For All Mankind because you told me to.
Because I told you to.
And I feel like I have so much catching up to do because during COVID, I probably turned to all my comfort shows.
A lot of us did. Well, I got a lot of people saying Voyager because they're isolated. They're basically quarantined from the Federation.
Oh yeah, good point. But I also recently, so I have a really good friend who's a huge Star Trek fan who you helped us go see Kate in the Marie Curie
Yes, the Marie
play.
Curie, the Half-Life of Marie Curie.
Yeah. And so we're not co-located anymore, so we've been watching Picard together, separately. So that also was one of my absolute favorites. But then she convinced me that I really needed to watch Strange New Worlds and Discovery. And what I'm loving about both of those is that just such a great ensemble cast. And so many different types of jobs being represented too, and different aspects of the human experience. Because also I feel like that's what, like with the infinite diversity and infinite combinations, I love that focus on just what it means to be human. Because I feel like the farther I get in my life, so I'm not a parent, I might have come to this realization sooner if I had been, but that everything really comes down to people. Yeah, you know, like, I mean, I love space and black holes and physics and all of that, but in my day-to-day job, it's all about people and connecting with them. And so then I've had many different life experiences in the last 10 years, and to see characters that have imposter syndrome or very clearly PTSD or isolation issues and things like that. Sometimes even though it's hardship, because you can relate to it, it feels familiar and it feels validating. And so I've really, really enjoyed that. And then I've actually gone back to X-Files. Because
Except for seasons 10 and 11, don't watch them.
Those do not exist.
Yeah, no. But mainly because of a little bit of how science is treated these days, and just really going back to like loving Scully and her just like asking the questions.
And the Scully effect
Looking for
being
answers.
the studied phenomenon of women going into law enforcement and forensic science as well. So,
Right,
you know.
that kicked off so much.
Yeah. How about you, Robert? What are you watching right now?
I'm sort of I go a little bit here and a little bit there, but for all mankind, it really does grab my attention because it's very smart and very intelligently made. It does go, as you mentioned before, it talks about issues of isolation and other things like that. That, you know, there was that vote that was taken here two panels ago, right? Who would go to Mars on a one-way trip, right? I would be the very, very first person to be in line there to go do a one-way trip, even if it was just for 6 months in Mars, and I was dead after that because if I didn't have a wife and kids, I would go there in a heartbeat because it is discovering and breaking some barriers on things. And what I think is interesting about some of those programs, and in particular for our mankind, is that there are sacrifices to be made. When you're going to space and you're going to be colonizing, you're going to be putting robots to do certain things, you have to make some choices, and those choices imply sacrifices in terms of our life here on Earth versus how it'll be out there. And so it's just a reality of doing it. It's not going to be comfy like it's here on Earth, right? So I think it's paramount and super important that we are able as humankind to go outside of our beautiful little planet here, make sure that we preserve our history, our love, our culture, our music, everything that we've created over the last few hundreds of years, or a few thousands of years actually, and make sure that it survives, because some event, something will hit us someday. Maybe it's in 1,000 years, maybe it's in a million years, but something will hit us again. And we've proven that things have hit Earth before. So I think it would be a horrible, horrible tragedy to lose everything all the technology and everything that we've developed in this little tiny blue sphere and just depend on it only. So it's our priority, it's our prerogative to go out and make sure that we can survive somewhere else. So that's why I like some of those shows.
How about you, Melissa? Being in the entertainment industry, I'm sure you maybe approach it a little bit differently, or you look to see, this is something I'd love to do, or these are people I'd love to work with. So what are you watching right now?
Yes, well...
it doesn't have to be sci-fi necessarily, but that's why we're here. But I do want to hear what you're watching
Definitely
right now.
the past year and a half, I have definitely leaned into comfort shows, shows that I've watched before. Definitely a lot of... I always joke that I am a working actor still for sure, but when I was auditioning and fighting to get that that great role, I would get so frustrated watching American television because I was like, I have auditioned for all these shows and they won't book me. So I really fell in love with British detective shows.
There we go.
And specifically period pieces.
Yes.
And so as fans of mine, and I've been active on social media this past year and a half, I've really fallen in love with Downton Abbey and period pieces.
It's okay, we can connect it right to
We
Picard.
absolutely can.
Right to Ed Speleers in
Because
Picard.
Ed Speleers from Downton Abbey then showed up in Picard, and I feel like I manifested that in some way. But the interesting thing about those period pieces and about detective shows is you still see the same principles that I find in, and I would be remiss not to shout out and to tell anyone who has not to please watch Strange New Worlds, not just because I'm on it, but because it's really good television. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, how accurate to the final degree something is. If it isn't a good story, people aren't going to want to watch it, and they're not going to want to rewatch it, and they're not going to remember it, and it isn't going to be something that, when they're older and they have kids and they have grandkids, that they remember and that they go back to that moment. Stories are everything. Like I think during the pandemic, and during the pandemic was really when Strange New Worlds was announced, even before I was cast in it, and when I was cast in it, we were still in the pandemic. What we saw throughout that first year of it was that, the world could be falling apart and, there's so much darkness, so much misery, so much shared misery and darkness. And what did people turn to? They turned to stories, right? Because, we could have all the medicine in the world, we could have all the answers, but if you don't have good stories, if you don't have good music, if you don't have things that you want to go home to and that you look forward to and that you're reaching for, then what is the point of all of it? And so there was so much pressure on Strange New Worlds when it was announced and when people were looking for it, because the beautiful thing about the show is it tells a story that we know, right? The original series. So many people, know Pike, they know Spock, they know Number One, they know Uhura. But we're somehow able to take this beautiful nostalgia and then also make something new out of it. And there was so much pressure to pay our respects to characters that people are so close to, and also to make an incredible show. And what we managed to do it was to get fantastic writers, fantastic actors, a fantastic crew who are all made up of fans, really. And we delivered this show that somehow was this light in the darkness. It went back to an adventure, a week kind of format. And so we have something beautiful, brilliant, in my opinion, and exciting to look forward to, and yet still we're grappling with questions of, what is it when you know that in the future, right, like Pike he knows what's going to happen to him, and his life is going to change profoundly, and he has to live with that, right? And what do you do when you know that life is comprised of grief and of death and of darkness, when you are a soldier who has seen the worst of humanity, and then still have to come back to a world where you're no longer in that? How do you navigate that? And so for my character, they've given me this wonderful role where she's funny, she's intelligent, she's capable, she's cocky, and she's also really loved by her crew. And I have a backstory, and I know what the backstory is because the producers have shared it with me.
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yes, and we're gonna see more of it. But where you realize that so many people, and I'm speaking to many Trek fans in the audience, but who love Star Trek because they have had, as we all have had, grief and darkness and low points in our life, and Star Trek shows us what we can reach when we get beyond that. And so my character of Ortegas, Anson's character of Pike, Christy's character of La'an, and on, we are all characters with backstories where there is a darkness and how we overcome that. And so I just find that in 2023, there's a real importance to that, and to acknowledging the importance of story and the importance of things that we want to watch over and over again and to come back to. And for many people, in the way that British detective period pieces are my go-to show, people tell me, Strange New Worlds is mine. It is the best compliment to an actor to hear that people want to rewatch your show over and over again. They go back to an episode and they see something new in it. And that's the beauty of Star Trek. And I have seen, I know what we've done for season 2. I'm excited for everyone to see it. But I just hope that we get, more people who come to it. But this idea of stories are what are bringing us to space. The idea of what is possible when we get to Mars. Essentially, we're writing a story that we don't know the conclusion to, but we're excited to get to, and it's that passion that is making this all possible.
Yeah, and just, even just seeing, what Matt Shindell had said in his book, For the Love of Mars, we've been looking up to Mars and talking about Mars since for many, many, many years, imagining what that's going to be like. We're almost at time, which is unfortunate because I wanted to try to take questions from the audience, but this has been an amazing panel. You guys have been fabulous. Please come, reach out to us on social media. We're all on a Twitter and Instagram. You can find it on our website and on our social at Explore Mars. But, just keep going forward with the idea that hashtag space is for everyone. So thank you so much.
I feel like we should all do some collective hand sign, right?
You should all just,
there we
everybody
go.
throw up your spot.
Coming up next, thank you again.
Okay,
Another
great.
big round of applause for our fantastic
guys.
panel. Thank you. Thank you.